What is the supreme principle of morality? Suppose the individual right to religious liberty were at stake. Is that an adequate way of thinking about justice? What's the right thing to do? We live some answer to these questions every day. This is a course about justice, and we begin with a story. Suppose you're the driver of a trolley car, and your trolley car is hurtling down the track at 60 miles an hour, and at the end of the track you notice 5 workers working on the track. You try to stop, but you can't. Your brakes don't work. You feel desperate because you know that if you crash into these 5 workers, they will all die. Let's assume you know that for sure. And so you feel helpless until you notice that there is, off to the right, a side track. And at the end of that track, there's one worker working on the track. Your steering wheel works, so you can turn the trolley car, if you want to, onto the side track, killing the one, but sparing the 5. Here's our first question. What's the right thing to do? What would you do? Let's take a poll. How many would turn the trolley car onto the side track? Raise your hands. How many wouldn't? How many would go straight ahead? A handful of people would. The vast majority would turn. Why would you do it? What would be your reason? Who's willing to volunteer a reason? Go ahead, stand up.
Because it can't be right to kill 5 people when you can only kill 1 person instead.
It wouldn't be right to kill 5 if you could kill 1 person instead. That's a good reason. That's a good reason.
I hadn't realized that the class was going to be so interactive. Because of its sheer size, I had expected it to be very much Professor Sindel lectures, and then we sit there and take notes. And from the very beginning, from the moment he appeared on that stage the first day, he made it clear that this was going to be a community effort. That really hooked me from the beginning.
Another trolley car case. This time you're not the driver of the trolley car, you're an onlooker. You're standing on a bridge overlooking a trolley car track. And down the track comes a trolley car. At the end of the track are 5 workers. The brakes don't work. The trolley car is about to careen into the 5 and kill them. And now, you're not the driver. You really feel helpless until you notice, standing next to you, leaning over the bridge, is a very fat man. And you could give him a shove. He would fall over the bridge, onto the track, right in the way of the trolley car. He would die, but he would spare the 5. Now, how many would push the fat man over the bridge? Raise your hand. How many wouldn't? Most people wouldn't. Here's the obvious question. What became of the principle? Better to save 5 lives even if it means sacrificing 1. What became of the principle that almost everyone endorsed in the first case? Yes?
The second one, I guess, involves an active choice of pushing the person down, which I guess that person himself would otherwise not have been involved in this situation at all. And so to choose on his behalf, I guess, to involve him in something that he otherwise would have escaped is, I guess, more than what you have in the first case, where the 3 parties, the driver and the 2 sets of workers, are already, I guess, in the situation.
But the guy working, the one on the track off to the side, he didn't choose to sacrifice his life any more than the fat man did he?
That's true, but he was on the tracks. And you...
This guy was on the bridge. Go ahead, you can come back if you want. All right, it's a hard question. All right, you did well. You did very well. It's a hard question.
Immediately, I realized I'd never been in a class like this before, where there's been such a question kind of posed from the outset, and where they kind of asked you to really think and consider the moral dilemma. And then on top of that, taking it one step forward, we were asked to participate. And I've never had such a fun class in my life, you know?
Find a way of reconciling the reaction of the majority in these two cases. Yes?
Well, I guess in the first case, where you have the one worker and the five, it's choice between those two, and you have to make a certain choice, and people are going to die because of the trolley car, not necessarily because of your direct actions. The trolley car is a runaway thing, and you're making a split-second choice, whereas pushing the fat man over is an actual act of murder on your part. You have control over that, whereas you may not have control over the trolley car. So I think it's a slightly different situation.
Who wants to reply? Is that a way out of this?
I don't think that's a very good reason, because you choose to, it's either way you have to choose who dies, because you either choose to turn and kill the person, which is an active conscious thought to turn, or you choose to push the fat man over, which is also an active conscious action. So either way you're making a choice.
Well, I'm not really sure that that's the case. And you brought up, XI brought up the fact that the fat man wasn't involved in the first place.
Was not involved. Or he was involved.
No, well, the fat man wasn't involved.
He was standing there, he was watching.
Right, it's true that he was standing there, but it just still seems kind of different, the act of actually pushing someone over onto the tracks and killing him. You are actually killing him yourself.
You're pushing him with your own hands.
You're pushing him, and that's
Right.
different than steering something that is going to cause death into another. You know, it doesn't
good.
really sound right saying it now.
No, it's
but
good.
I'm up here.
It's good. What's your name?
Andrew.
Andrew. Let me ask you this question, Andrew.
Yes.
Suppose standing on the bridge next to the fat man, I didn't have to push him. Suppose he were standing over a trap door that I could open by turning a steering wheel like that. Would you turn?
For some reason, that still just seems more wrong.
Notice two things about the arguments that we've had. First, notice something about...
It was from that first point forward that you realized that justice and philosophy, these weren't just abstract things, these were things that could really relate to your life. And these were things that once you thought about, as he said, your life would never be the same again. And I think for most of us in justice, it's really been that way, that you can never approach any of the issues that we've dealt with in this class without thinking about justice, without thinking about the different arguments that we were exposed to, that we challenged and questioned and listened to and learned from. And you know, from that point forward, I, like the other 1,000 people in the class, were hooked.
One of the best things about justice was the fact that the discussions we had in class didn't end when the class ended. And so we would leave lecture and maybe, you know, go have lunch or dinner with friends. And the discussion would be just as heated and just as animated over a meal as in lecture or in section.
The aim is not to try to persuade students of one or another moral or political opinion. It's really to equip students to become critically minded citizens who have the ability to think through the big moral and political questions that all of us confront as citizens. Could you pay people in a just society vastly different amounts depending on the work they did? We talked about the examples of Michael Jordan making $31 million a year, of Bill Gates having a fortune in the tens of billions. Would those inequalities be permitted?
I think that the question and answer style of the class, this kind of Socratic method, is really important to learning the material because a sense of right and wrong and ethics isn't something you could read in a book and memorize. It's a way of living, it's a way of looking at the world, it's a way of thinking. And so I think the fact that the class emphasized asking the individual students questions and how the students responded was important, because then the focus wasn't necessarily the exact words that John Locke or John Rawls used. It was how you react to them. And so, yeah, it emphasized the fact that moral reasoning and ethics is more about a way of thinking than what somebody else in the past has already thought.
All right, let's start up in the balcony, if that's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, your argument depends upon us believing that we would argue and set policy or justice from a bottom, for the disadvantaged. And I just don't see from a proof standpoint where we've proven that. Why not the top? If Rawls had written that, we could be sitting here and arguing we should make every policy that the top 10% benefit the most, or the middle of the pack. I'm just not clear on where your proof is that, okay, the bottom, let's move forward and make policy from that standpoint.
Right. And what's your name?
Mike.
Mike, all right, good question. Put yourself behind the veil of ignorance. Enter into the thought experiment. What principles would you choose?
In that situation, I would say a merit-based one, where I don't necessarily know what I have, but I'd rather have a system that rewards me based on my efforts.
Who has an answer to Mike? What would you say? Go ahead.
My question is, if the merit-based argument is based on when everyone is at a level of equality, where from that position you're rewarded to where you get, or is it regardless of what advantages you may have when you began your education to get where you are here?
I mean, I think what the question you're asking is saying, if we want to look at whatever utilitarianism policy it is, do we want to maximize world wealth? And I think a system that rewards merit is the one that we've pretty much all established is what is best for all of us, despite the fact that some of us may be in the 2nd percentile and some may be in the 98th percentile. And at the end of the day, it lifts that lowest base level, a community that rewards effort as opposed to innate differences.
But I don't understand how you're rewarding someone's efforts who clearly has had, not you, but maybe myself, advantages throughout to get where I am here. I mean, I can't say that the efforts that that somebody else who maybe worked as hard as I did would have had the same opportunity to come to a school like this.
All right, let's look at that point. What's your name?
Kate.
Kate?
I think to some extent his aim was to expose, to the students the extent to which, these abstract philosophical questions really are relevant in our daily lives. He challenges us to, recognize that, with an issue like abortion or military conscription, that you can't, really have an opinion on these without sort of thinking about these questions. And it's important to sort of recognize where your positions on one issue may be inconsistent with positions on another.
Mike, does it bother you that in a meritocratic system, even with fair equality of opportunity, people get ahead, people get rewards that they don't deserve simply because they happen to be naturally gifted? What do you say?
Bring Michael Jordan here, I'm sure you can get him, and have him come and defend himself about why he makes $31 million. And I think what you're going to realize is his life was a very, very tough one to get to the top, and that we are basically being the majority oppressing the minority in a different light. It's very easy to pick on him. Very easy.
Effort. You know what? All right, you've persuaded a lot of people. Effort. You know what Rawls' answer to that is? Even the effort that some people expend, conscientious striving, the work ethic, even effort depends a lot on fortunate family circumstances for which we can claim no credit. Let's do a test here. Never mind economic class, those differences are very significant. Put those aside. Psychologists say that birth order makes a lot of difference in work ethic, striving, effort. How many here, raise your hand, those of you here who are first in birth order? I am too, by the way. Mike, I noticed you raised your hand.
Did?
If the case for the meritocratic conception is that effort should be rewarded, doesn't Rawls have a point that even effort, striving, work ethic is largely shaped even by birth order? Is it your doing, Mike? Is it your doing that you were first in birth order? Then why, Rawls says, of course not. So why should income and wealth and opportunities in life be based on factors arbitrary from a moral point of view? That's a challenge that he puts to market societies, but also to those of us at places like this.
I definitely felt pulled in many different directions as the course went by. Because, you start off reading about utilitarianism, maximizing the most pleasure for the most people. And to me, when I read that, it made a lot of sense. And then we start to get into the objections, and then you see how it doesn't make sense. And so you'd read something else which addresses those, and you think, oh, so this makes sense. And so it was a very kind of this way and that class. You'd read something, you'd think this makes a lot of sense, then you'd go to class, and some brilliant student, or Sandel himself, would stand up and show you why you're wrong.
I do think it is disquieting to sort of realize the extent to which, sort of the knee-jerk reaction to, a hot political topic conceals a lot of subtleties. It's easy to sort of have a position on the issue if you don't think about it critically. And, part of the debate, the in-class, standing up and the Socratic method and everything was to, expose how many sides there are to each issue.
One of the cool things about it is he strung the philosophies together, so we would come to a point where we couldn't figure out what was the right thing, or we came to an answer we wouldn't like in one philosophy. And then he would say, well, there's another philosophy that kind of addresses, this set of questions, and we'd go into studying that. And so you could definitely see how they related to each other, what kinds of moral problems each philosophy was equipped to solve, and the differences in how they solve them.
Toward the end of the course, we take up the topic of same-sex marriage. It's a way of testing an idea that students are exposed to in Aristotle, the idea of telos, or purpose. In order to decide rights and justice, we first have to argue through the purpose, or telos, of social institutions, in this case, marriage.
I have sort of a teleological understanding of the purpose of sex and the purpose of marriage. And I think that it's difficult to separate that teleological understanding from the place that it originates. And I think that for people like myself who are a Christian and also a Catholic, the purpose of sex is, one, for its procreative uses, and two, for a unifying purpose between a man and a woman within the institution of marriage.
You have a certain conception of the purpose, or the telos, of human sexuality, which is bound up with procreation.
Right.
As well as union.
Yeah.
And the essence of marriage, the purpose of marriage as a social institution, is to give expression to that telos and to honor that purpose, namely the procreative purpose of marriage. Is that a fair summary of your view?
Yeah.
I'd just like to ask a question to Mark. Let's say you got married to a woman, you did not have sex with her before marriage, and then when you became married, it became evident that you were an infertile couple. Do you think that it should be illegal for you to engage in sex if children will not result from that act?
Yeah, I think that it is moral, and that's why I gave the two. So like a woman, say, I think older couples can get married, a woman who's beyond, who's already had menopause, and who can't have a child, because I think that sex has it has purposes beyond procreation.
I mean, your beliefs are your beliefs, and that's fine. But civil union is not marriage within the Catholic Church. And the state has a right to recognize a civil union between whoever it wants, but it does not have a right to impose the beliefs of a certain minority or majority or whoever it is based on a religion within our state.
All right, Victoria.
There's such a spectrum of views, and that people who make arguments for a particular way of looking at things, whether it's utilitarianism or communitarianism or whatever, they're very compelling arguments, and it's hard to resolve it. And people have been arguing for millennia, really, and there's still not one definite answer. And in ways that makes philosophy impossible, but it makes it beautiful at the same time, that we're still debating similar questions and we're still trying to find better answers.
Why do you think that it's a mistake for the state to try to be neutral on moral and even religious questions like same-sex marriage?
I don't know that it is possible, because people's lives are completely embedded in how they view the world, and maybe I just agree with Aristotle that the role of the government is helping people live in a sort of, like, having a collective understanding of what is wrong and what is right.
Is it possible, and one could ask the same question of abortion that we've been asking of same-sex marriage, do you think it's possible to decide whether abortion should be permitted or prohibited without taking a stand or making a judgment about the moral permissibility of abortion?
No, I don't think it is, and I think that's why it's such a controversy, because people are so deeply committed to, like, their fundamental beliefs about whether a fetus is a life or if it isn't. So if I believe that a fetus is a living being and has rights and has, like, fundamentally the right to live, then it's very hard for me to say, but I can put that aside and let you do what you want, because that's like me saying, well, despite my beliefs, I'm going to let you commit what to me is murder.
Well, I think you absolutely can separate your moral opinion and what you think the law should be. For example, I think abortion is unequivocally morally wrong, but I do not believe that illegalizing abortion makes it go away. I don't believe illegalizing abortion stops it, and therefore I am pro-choice, and I do believe the woman should have the choice, as it gives them more safety, just as maybe morally I don't want to get married to a man, but I'm not going to try to, impede someone else's freedom to do what they wish to do in terms of the law.
Andrea?
Whether the law makes something legal or illegal it's implicitly approving or disapproving something. So if you say, like, by making abortion legal, we're saying it's okay. As a society, collectively, we're saying it's okay with us in our society to abort a fetus. If we make it legal, if we make it illegal, then we're saying collectively as a society, it's not okay. And that's why societies have different beliefs.
Tell us your name before.
My name is Daniel.
Daniel, what do you say?
Are we saying collectively that it's okay? Or are we saying that collectively we don't want women who are going to have an abortion anyway to go to clinics in the side alleys and have it, unsafe conditions?
All right, bring it to the same-sex marriage case. Why don't you have to decide that which position you're in favor of same-sex marriage, Daniel, being legally permitted?
I think it absolutely should be legally permitted, because it's not something telling me that I need to marry a man. I absolutely don't see, if two men are consenting adults and want to get married, I don't see how I could even object to that.
All right, there's no harm.
There's no harm done either way, even if it is morally wrong according to me.
All right, let me turn to the way the Massachusetts Superior Court, who made this landmark ruling in the same-sex marriage case, grappled with the very issue that Andrea and Dan have been discussing here. Thanks to both of you very much.
Sandel, gives students the confidence to, stand up and engage with the philosophers and debate them and recognize that these works, whether they were written, 5 years ago or 1,000 years ago, are really living pieces of scholarship, and that, a 20-year-old Harvard student can stand up and, take his or her position and really engage with those works.
And you wonder why, at first, if we're going to go through these questions again and again and again, is there really need to if we cannot all agree on one definitive answer? And one of the things Professor Sandel said at the beginning of the course, and he said at the end of the course, is that even if these questions are unanswerable in one sense, They're inescapable in another sense. And that's why we have to engage in that debate. That's why we have to wrestle with these questions. And that's really what justice is about. Looking at the arguments, studying the objections, addressing them, which we did in our papers, and ultimately trying to form some sort of coherent philosophy out of the many different political philosophies that we've been exposed to, each of which have developed in their own political tradition over thousands of years.
Why, we asked at the outset, why do these arguments keep going, even if they raise questions that are impossible ever finally to resolve? The reason is that we live some answer to these questions all the time. In our public life and in our personal lives, philosophy is inescapable, even if it sometimes seems impossible. We began with the thought of Kant, that skepticism is a resting place for human reason, where it can reflect upon its dogmatic wanderings, but it is no dwelling place for permanent settlement. To allow ourselves simply to acquiesce in skepticism or in complacence, Kant wrote, can never suffice to overcome the restlessness of reason. The aim of this course has been to awaken the restlessness of reason and to see where it might lead. And if we have done at least that, and if the restlessness continues to afflict you in the days and years to come, then we together have achieved no small thing. Thank you.
Taking justice was really an eye-opening experience for me. Everything that you've thought of up to that point becomes questioned, becomes challenged, and you really have to, you have to navigate your way through these questions, and you can't do it falsely because ultimately reason and truth, these things are staring you right in the face.